Hello dear viewers and welcome back to the channel. I hope you missed me because it has been quite a while since I uploaded anything, but today I have something quite rare and probably unknown to many people, a graphics card called Intel Arc B580 featuring a massive 12GB of VRAM. It might seem a little bit strange at first that a company known for making CPUs decided to enter graphics card market, but competition is always a good thing. And in this video I am going to tell you what my experience has been like using this little beast for past 3 months. This time I didn't borrow stuff, I actually bought it as a bit of an experiment from my friends at local computer parts store called Kilobytes, even though they tried to convince me not to buy it. But as they say, no risk, no reward. So instead of buying some random no-name product, I went with Sparkle and their model called Titan OC Luna Edition, a brand name that many of you probably haven't even heard of. Sparkle is a Taiwanese company that has been around for over 30 years. They even worked with Nvidia in the past, and in 2023 they decided to become an Intel partner, producing custom graphics cards and cooling solutions for Arc GPUs. The card cost me almost 300 euros, and the first thing that surprised me was the build quality. Honestly, even some Nvidia graphics cards don't feel as premium in your hands as this one. Who would have thought about this kind of irony? I am installing an Intel GPU into my AMD CPU powered system, and the first thing that made me happy was seeing that this card still uses a traditional PCI power connector. But who knows, maybe in the future everyone will switch to that burning piece of crap. On your screens you can see the specifications of my main PC. There was a few changes from the last time. About half a year ago I upgraded my CPU to Ryzen 7 9800X3D, and my Razer keyboard also started dying. Few keys simply stopped working, so I had to buy a new one. Other than that, there haven't been any upgrades, mainly because of this ridiculous AI boom that has pushed memory prices to absolutely crazy levels. So, to get ahead of myself, I wanted to start with the problems I ran into while using this Intel graphics card. The first issue is that the card doesn't have a proper built-in recording software like Nvidia Shadowplay or AMD Relief. This means that the only way to record gameplay or stream are by using OBS or external recording device such as a capture card. And since a decent capture card costs almost as GPU itself, I decided to try using OBS Studio instead, but even there I ran into some unexpected issues. One of the biggest issues is that the recording framerate has to match framerate in the game. For example, if you're recording at 60 FPS, the game itself also needs to run at exactly 60 FPS, no more no less. The easiest way to achieve this is by using an FPS limiter, otherwise the video looks like a laggy slideshow. On screen I am showing a few examples of how it looks when everything is set up correctly and how the recording looks when FPS doesn't match. So, to show you what this card is capable of without any artificial FPS limits, I decided to cheat a little bit and simply point the camera at my monitor. Even though I have 4K monitor, I tested all the games with this card at 1440p resolution. So, our first candidate is this year's horror game bestseller called Resident Evil Requiem. First of all, I apologize for the small spoilers, but I really wanted to show you that Leon Kennedy still refuses to retire. What I can say about this game: this is a Capcom title with excellent optimization and absolutely amazing graphics. The game also supports path tracing, but unfortunately that feature only works with latest Nvidia graphics cards. But when I say works, I mean you would probably need at least RTX 5090 if you want a comfortable FPS experience with that setting enabled. Meanwhile, the Intel card running at almost maximum settings with standard ray tracing and frame generation enabled delivers a surprisingly good results. As you can see from the monitoring data, the game is using more than 9GB of VRAM, and depending on the location it can climb up to 12, and this is where some Nvidia cards would start struggling with their miserable 8GB. Next on our list is an old but still absolutely amazing game with one of the best western stories ever made called Red Dead Redemption 2. Even though GTA 6 is already around the corner, that around the corner is mostly true for consoles. So while we are waiting, I would suggest revisiting this Rockstar masterpiece, which even today beats many newer games in both quality and amount of content it offers. So with the completely maxed out settings at 1440p resolution, we are getting over 60 FPS, which is honestly more than enough for this type of game. Keep in mind that when this game originally released on PlayStation 4, it ran at lower settings than the absolute minimum settings on PC, and only at 30 FPS. One thing I wanted to mention is that the performance you are seeing here is very similar to the RTX 3070 and 2080 Ti, which is really impressive result for this budget graphics card. Next on our list is a game that has probably already been slightly forgotten, the post-apocalyptic Ukrainian title called Stalker 2. The zone has received quite a few updates over time, although some of them seem to break more things than they actually fixed. A DLC should also arrive soon, which will allow players to explore Chernobyl nuclear power plant itself, and developers also promised an engine upgrade, but does it really need one? Meanwhile, we can enjoy maximum settings without worrying about being limited by video memory, and even in the most demanding locations we are getting very stable frame rates, so playing through this game with Intel Arc card is simply going to be a pleasure. And now let's see how Intel card performs in the games that you're probably going to play much more often than those one-time single-player titles. So our first candidate is everyone's favorite Counter-Strike 2, which is played by around 1 million people every day. Although it's hard to say how many of those are actual players, because Valve is still fighting against bot servers farming skins. With almost lowest settings we are getting really good frame rate. Of course, you could always increase graphics fidelity, but that still won't give you any extra skill. The Intel card handles this game really well, although the game itself is not very demanding on GPU side. In situations like this, a better CPU would provide much bigger benefits. Next on the list is another game that is already quite old, but still almost as popular as Counter-Strike, battle royale game called PUBG. There are rumors that a sequel is being developed, which unfortunately will use Unreal Engine 5, but who knows, maybe developers will actually manage to optimize it. As they say, a bad dancer will blame his balls. This time I used medium settings, although you could easily play on maximum settings as well. But what is the point when you can't even see your enemy hiding in those Ultra HD bushes? When a game is optimized so well that it can even run on mobile phones, the Intel card handles it like a walk in the park. I almost forgot one more title that refuses to lose its popularity, PvP game called Rust. Even though it was released around 8 years ago, it still has crazy amount of players, and honestly it looks like more than 70% of them are playing it every single day. There is simply no life without Rust. If you have played it, you will understand. And the good news is that B580 handles this game quite well. I used low settings because, well, I highly doubt that many people play this game on Ultra, then the main goal is simply to survive and spot the enemy before they spot you. But we also have to remember that this game is running on top tier Ryzen CPU and plenty of RAM, and Rust absolutely loves eating memory. Unfortunately, RAM prices right now are insane, and it looks like things won't be changing anytime soon. And now let's take a look at something more modern, starting with recently released Battlefield 6. But before continuing, I would like to briefly mention Zampella, a person whose name means a lot in FPS genre. On December 21, 2025, Vince sadly passed away in a car accident in California, leaving behind a massive legacy in gaming industry. He was one of the founders of Infinity Ward and one of the people who helped create games such as Call of Duty, Titanfall and Apex Legends, while also contributing to the revival of the Battlefield series. Even though this person is no longer with us, his work will continue living on in the computers of the millions of players for many years to come. Now, returning to the game itself, at high settings with ultra textures enabled, we get an excellent result, reaching over 100 FPS. There is no shortage of VRAM, the game looks absolutely great, but unfortunately, within less than a year, the player count has dropped by almost 80%. Even though the launch was truly impressive, the hype wave disappeared quite quickly. Maybe this is simply the result of a lack of new content, but if you're a loyal fan of this series, the Intel Arc card will let you run around Battlefield without any problems. Naturally, the next game on the list is the one we have already mentioned a couple of times, the well-known Call of Duty Warzone. Even though everyone, including myself, thought that Battlefield would finally kill its rival, reality turned out to be a little different. Warzone still attracts over the million players every single day. Of course, it is free to play game, but even Battlefield tried to release its own alternative called RedSec. Unfortunately, it never managed to achieve the same level of popularity. Meanwhile, if you're a Warzone fan, the Intel card will let you comfortably enjoy your time in Verdansk. For this test I used low settings with high texture quality, because as I mentioned before, seeing the enemy is more important than having a beautiful scenery. Call of Duty is also a game that really loves consuming a lot of VRAM, and in this situation Intel definitely has enough to share. It would be a shame not to show you an ARC game running on ARC GPU. In other words, our next subject is a game called ARC Riders. A lot of noise was made around this title, but like many other hyped games, after the first wave of excitement, this extraction shooter got infested with cheaters and player count dropped drastically. Game is well optimized, and what is interesting that it was built using modified version of Unreal Engine 5, which is quite surprising because words optimization and Unreal Engine usually don't get along very well in the same sentence. First, I launched the game with epic settings and ray tracing enabled, and surprisingly enough, everything looks great and performs just as well. This game does not need hundreds of FPS to feel comfortable to play. It also doesn't require a huge amount of VRAM, but if we lower the settings to high and disable ray tracing, the frame rate almost doubles, and visually the difference is quite small, so once again the Intel Arc card handles this game really well. Next on our list is another game that shares a similar story of a huge drop in popularity, the game called Helldivers 2. I have already mentioned in my previous videos that the optimization here is excellent. Graphics, physics and overall chaos in this game are almost flawless. At 1440p resolution and high settings we are getting over 60 FPS, and this is another game that absolutely does not need high FPS to have great time running across planets, shooting bugs, robots and aliens, all in the name of democracy. Not everyone only plays the newest games. I have never shown or even mentioned this game in any of my videos before, but this time I decided to test an old Valve classic that is already 17 years old, called Left 4 Dead 2. And surprisingly enough, this old dinosaur running on the Source engine still has a daily player count similar to Battlefield 6. This is simply an immortal classic. Although the former developers later left Valve and released spiritual sequel called Back 4 Blood, that game, to put it nicely, completely disappeared. Today it is played only by few hundred people. Meanwhile, this survival game, with its zombie physics, atmosphere and incredible amount of effort put into it, still beats many modern games. So, at maximum settings, without any ray tracing, because that technology didn't even exist back then, we are getting over 500 frames per second. So, with Intel Arc graphics card, you will be able to comfortably play even such an old game. So, we have gone through all the main popular and relevant games. Now I would like to talk about Intel's own technological capabilities. Surprisingly enough, Intel Arc handles ray tracing very well, and in some cases it can even outperform similarly priced competitors, mostly thanks to 12GB of VRAM. The thing that surprised me the most is that this card even supports quadruple frame generation, and game called Hogwarts Legacy is perfect example here. On screen you will see three different scenarios: without frame generation, with frame generation set to 2x, and with 4x enabled through Intel's control panel. However, Hogwarts Legacy really loves VRAM, so when enabling quadruple frame generation, I had to lower texture quality to high. Similar situation can be seen in already well-known Cyberpunk 2077. Even here the Intel Arc is capable of running path tracing, but you cannot do it without some help. Quadruple frame generation becomes almost a necessary setting if you want a smooth experience. So when it comes to these extra features, Intel isn't really far behind Nvidia. But not everything is as perfect as it might seem at first glance. As I mentioned at the beginning, Intel does not have a proper recording software solution, so you have to rely on alternative options. Apart from that, there is also a few other small issues. For example, in Hunt Showdown, you can sometimes notice texture bugs. Nothing critical, but they do appear from time to time. Another interesting thing I noticed that after a clean driver installation, the first time you launch the game, the performance is actually very good. However, if you close the game and then launch it again, around 1/3 of the performance can disappear. This is something I only noticed in this particular game, but it's still worth mentioning. If Hunt Showdown is your main game, then this card might not be the best choice for you. So, we have reached the end of this journey. These almost 3 months of living with Intel graphics card brought quite a few challenges, and at the beginning I was honestly close to abandoning the idea of reviewing this product altogether. Of course, I also had to cut some corners with video recording, but I hope you won't judge me too harshly for that. Even bigger companies like Nvidia and AMD have their own problems. As they say, there are no perfect products. And with the current memory crisis, which will most likely continue for several more years, affordable components are becoming harder and harder to find. The Intel Arc B580 is genuinely a decent budget graphics card, and it's clear that Intel is trying to give us more choices. However, they still have a long road ahead. Now we can also understand why we haven't seen higher-end Intel graphics cards yet. When there are still so many hidden problems and challenges in the budget segment, there is no reason to rush into the more competitive high-end market, but maybe the situation will change in the future. For now, this is definitely a good graphics card. However, if you're buying it for specific needs, I would strongly recommend checking beforehand how it performs with the applications and games you personally use, and decide if the results are good enough for you. When it comes to overall performance, the B580 often finds itself very close to similarly priced GPU called RTX 5060. Sometimes it performs slightly worse and sometimes better than Nvidia, and in some situations, thanks to its larger amount of VRAM, it can allow you to increase graphics settings significantly, something that other cards in the same price segment simply cannot offer. Thanks for sticking around, don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you in the next one.